Hello and welcome to In the Light Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel, and my guest today is Iona Jenkins. Hello, Iona.
Hi, Anna. Really nice to be here.
Nice to meet you as well. Your book, it just captures the imagination, the title, To
I'm
Sing
so
with
glad.
Bards. Yes, To Sing with Bards and Angels, Journey into the Creative Heart.
Yes.
Tell us about it.
Well, it's something that happened over a couple of years, but in fact, it started quite a long time ago when I still lived in London. And I actually went to Italy. We used to have some neighbours who live in Lazio, which is just south of Rome, and we went to stay with them. And of course, I had to go around all the art. The art was fantastic in Rome. There were so many, every street corner's got statues and fantastic things. Every church, every building's got paintings. It was just so amazing. We had to go look around the Vatican. Now, I do come from a Catholic background, though I can't say that I'm a Catholic now. And it was just so amazing to be looking at all that stuff in the Vatican. It was inspirational. It was almost like I was seeing something different to what I'd had in my childhood. There was something massively feminine about it. It started in the Sistine Chapel when I actually thought, I'm picking up something that Michelangelo picked up in here. I'm actually feeling the soul of the artist in these paintings, and I've never felt that before. Maybe it's because it's religious art, I don't know, but I felt that looking at Byzantine pictures, icons. I felt that on several occasions since. And then when we went home to the neighbour's house, I went outside with my notebook because it was tea time and it was still warm and there was sunshine. And it was a time of year when there were ripe lemons on the trees in the gardens. And it was beautifully scented. And I went to sit on a bench with the mountains in the background. And it was almost like all the art I'd seen started to mingle with the landscape, the scent of the lemons, the rays from the afternoon sun, the feeling of the mountains, the feeling of the peace. It all came together in one place. And it was like nature and art mingled into this amazing thing. And I picked up my pen and I wrote a poem called The Language of Angels. Coming from all those angel pictures I'd seen and then finding it in the landscape. Now, in this place, which is called Cisterna di Latina, there is a sacred well next to the church. So I guess this is quite a feminine landscape anyway. And there were lots of kiwi trees and just amazing fruit at that time of year. It was early autumn. That's where it started with that poem, The Language of Angels. A few years later, when we went through a lot of difficulties and we moved to Wales and we bought this flat on the cliff, then I started to look at the moon on the water. When the moon's full, I open my door and because I'm right on the top of the cliff, and it's like there's this path across the sea. It starts gold and then it gets wider and wider and becomes silver. And it always draws me in. And then I had the impression that I'm talking to an angelic being in the moonlight. I couldn't actually see it outside. It was almost like there were shapes forming, and I'm starting to get ideas. And I started to write. I just picked up my pen and I started to write. And it was almost like I couldn't stop until I'd finished. And I thought I was talking to an angelic being. Now, that might be my higher self. It might have been inside and outside. But often what we find inside, starts to live outside as well. So that's where it started. I had my first astarial, what I call channel conversation. And the book came into being from that point. And it goes back over quite a lot of my travels, and I pick up a lot of different ideas, different inspirations I had over the years, and start to put them all together into a kind of creative formula, if you like, which is why it's a journey into the creative heart, because the angelic being suggested that this was a path of the heart. And if I was so inclined to follow it, he'd be happy to help me along the way. So I thought, that's amazing. I have to do that then. You know, it just seemed like the right thing to do at the time. And that's carried on. And it's just, you know, it's just working itself out. All sorts of amazing things happened. I've met some nice people, um, people with similar ideas, and it's just going along. I just feel like I've come to a place where I have this sense of belonging, this sense of hearth and home, and that's a place where I sit and write. And it's not just the top of the cliff; it's an internal place. But this seems to be the right environment for me and for my husband, who was very ill, and he's recovered.
Well,
And
that
yeah, we've had 10 good years here now, because, you know, obviously we're both retired, but I'm not actually retired because I spend all my time getting ideas, finding connections and putting them together. And I think, you know, to find creativity in later life, when you've worked hard for 40 odd years, you know, it's kind of an amazing thing. I think I can stop now. I've got time to do that. I can just sit and write all these ideas. I can just write down on notebooks all over the house, keep glasses, you know, pairs of glasses everywhere so that I can put them on and just get on with it. Every time the moon's full, I go out there and I sit in the moonlight in the summer and sometimes even in the winter and sit under the stars because, you know, at that side of the flat, there's just the sea, so I can see the sky properly, and I can see the Somerset coast, and it's like there's a whole amazing kingdom there, you know, that I can be in.
so listening to you, it's so many things are coming into my mind. And firstly, it's the evocative imagery
Mm,
that you're describing, which of course is the imagery that surrounds you
mhm,
when you are inspired.
mm.
Um, but the second thing that's really very important is the fact that you're experiencing your creativity as a direct link
Mm,
with another being.
mhm.
And I think that's interesting because we have, you know, the very notion of the muse
Yes,
is exactly that, is that
yes.
there's that this is not that this is a collaborative effort. The
Mhm,
inspiration in, you know, it's coming in from the outside.
mhm.
And we do hear many songwriters talk about songs
Mm,
arriving in their
that's
mind.
right. Yes.
And I think that's so this is a very common human experience. Well, not that common. It's not like a universal experience, but it's common amongst people who are very creative to speak about
Mhm,
this thing just arriving in their minds and
mhm,
then feeling compelled to write it,
mm.
so or to draw it, to paint, to so maybe the question I want to ask is, because you said that you'd never really done anything creative before, um, is
I
that
had.
true, or have you
I
done?
have, in that I've written poetry,
Okay,
and
so
I've
this
gone
was your,
outside in nature and done that.
yeah, so
But
this was your already your medium.
yes, I guess, you know, I'd spent time getting qualifications. I'd been working first as a teacher, then as a psychotherapist, hypnotherapist, and I'd been, you know, I'd been doing that, and that was fairly inspired too. I mean, that always seemed to be inspired by the people I was with, and there were often transpersonal experiences that went with that, and it was quite fascinating. But I never seemed to have time to write it down because I had a job part-time in the day from Monday to Wednesday, and then I had a private practice as well, which often took place in the evening. It was only when I was out in Kew Gardens in London, you know, or in all the parks and gardens of West London, which I used to do on a regular basis at the weekend, um, that I really had time to sit in nature and for that to come out. And it was almost like I felt like I was being guided all the time. Now, I was a creative child. I wasn't a creative young adult, apart from the fact that I like fashion and beads and all the hippie things that were around. I tried to play the guitar, but it hurt my fingers, so I managed to string a few chords together, and I did some folk singing because I did get a voice. I do have a voice, so I did some folk songs, but I could never play a musical instrument. It's almost like my hands wouldn't coordinate with my mind in that direction. I could only sing. So now I don't actually sing outside anymore, but what I do is I sing in my poetry and my writing, my books.
I recognize what you're saying about working as a psychotherapist and a hypnotherapist, because regular viewers will already know that I am an analytical hypnotherapist myself.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. It is an incredibly intuitive way to work. And there are definitely transpersonal experiences which happen and feel sometimes quite magical.
Yes.
Between me and my clients, and clearly between you and your clients. It's a very powerful and beautiful experience. So really, I think what we're talking about is that creative mind creating an opening to link with something spiritual.
Yeah, it was often like there was another presence in the room. And although scientists might have, some kind of explanation for it, the scent of roses in a room when there's no flowers there is really quite lovely. And it kind of lets you relax into the space with the client, because you know that somebody's holding both of you, or some power is holding both of you. That's how it felt to me anyway. And I remember talking to a tutor about these experiences I was having whilst I was training, and said, well, I'm not quite sure what to do with it because it doesn't fit in. What do I do? What do I do about things like scents in the room? And he said, well, you have to be yourself. This was client-centered work, so you have to be congruent, but you can't come out of the frame of reference of the client. So somehow you have to find a way of using it whilst adhering to the client's frame of reference. And I remember working with a client who was suffering from anxiety, and we were not doing hypnotherapy. It was just, counseling work. And she said one day, after all this had happened, she said, I've heard that lavender is very good for anxiety. And I said, yes, I've heard that too, but I'm wondering whether rose might be better because I've heard that is as well. So she got some rose from the Body Shop and put it on tissues. And every time she went out, if she felt anxious, she smelled it, and it took the anxiety away and enabled her to go to the shops or do what she had to do. So, that scent came for a reason, and it was usable, but it wasn't usable until she mentioned it. But it was really strange how she did.
Yes, indeed. I find that sometimes I just make odd suggestions, just little suggestions. Oh, have you thought perhaps about trying this? Or have you thought about trying that? And then I discover that the person's been thinking about it,
Yes.
but actually done it, until I say, well, have a go.
Yes. So there's the interchange going on.
Exactly.
The thing that's going on in the room that's invisible. Fascinating,
Exactly.
amazing thing.
And so your book, is the focal point of your writing always angels, or because it seems to me an intermingling of art and nature, as you've already said.
Yes. Art and nature are inspirational, but once you start going into those realms, you start to pick up the presence of, a light community, other existences, That's what I found. And so sometimes the angels are a focus, or in this case, this one angel is a focus who seems to be a guide. And other times, I'm just seem to be getting the message from a tree, or I'm getting the message from a group of flowers. I remember being out with a friend, and she wasn't feeling very well, and suddenly I heard the wind in the trees, and I could see the tree branches blowing, and it was almost like waves on the ocean. And then I saw the flowers doing the same thing, and I said, "Stop, listen to the wind in the trees." And she did, and then got to focus her eyes on the waving flowers, and she became silent in her mind, and that's where she had a chance to start to feel better. You know, nature is so inspirational. Sometimes it's the wind that's speaking to me, the elements. That's why I like druidry so much, is because I can go do that. It enables me to do it. And I'm sure, all sorts of other faiths and religions can do it. I'm not pushing any particular thing. People can do their own thing. If people stand on the earth, they put their feet on the earth and they stretch up to the sky, they're going to get inspiration, whatever land they're in, but it will come to them in their own symbols.
It certainly will. I spent a good time of my adolescence and teenage years visiting in the summer beaches on the Atlantic coast of America.
Well, yeah.
And I did a lot of writing about the sea at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That was definitely a point of inspiration for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I look back at sometimes what I've written, and I don't actually remember writing it.
No.
It feels very otherworldly, particularly in the last few years. And I go back and I think, oh, who wrote that? And I realize it's actually one of my own notes.
Yes.
But I don't actually remember. So it's something that is definitely a combination, because it feels like it's an expression of something inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't feel entirely my own.
No. But it's almost like, the internal locus of evaluation is starting to reflect outside, which creates the balance. And creativity is like that, I think. You create something, becomes created inside, which enables it, then you start to put it out, and it enables it to live in the outside world, which is why we have to be so careful about what we create and where we're coming from, which is why the creative heart is, for me, the place to be. And the angel corroborated that when you create from here, what you're doing is you're putting out something that's going to be life enhancing rather than destructive, because people make destructive things too. But it's amazing if you can come from a place of love and of caring for humanity. Then that's what will come out in the creativity. I write because I want a better world, and I write in a particular voice that has become my own. Where it came from, I don't know, because I don't talk like that. I've got a Yorkshire accent. But my people say my prose is lyrical.
Yes, it is. So one of the things I like about your book is that you've got it's almost like each chapter is an experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an experience that's your personal experience with the poem that goes with it.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's a practice section
Yes.
as well. So tell us about that.
Well, I've tried to keep those simple because I want everybody to be able to experience them, and I want it to cross the boundaries of culture and creed. For people to just go outside and connect to nature wherever their ancestry may have come from, to be able to connect to the connect to the land in the country they're in, and actually just experience it. And then a simple exercise to put that in, to bring that into being. Now, it doesn't always happen straight away. Sometimes have to do the exercise a few times. But most people have said these exercises are really quite easy, but they're really effective. That you can tap into nature and you can get your own symbols. Now, someone who comes from Africa is not going to get the same colors and symbols as I do, because they may have been brought up in a different way or in a household with different language. It's going to come out differently, but it's going to come out in the right way for them. And I think everybody can be creative. It's just, what is your intent for being creative? What do you want to create? Do you have a reason for being creative? And I had to sit down and think about that. Am I doing this because I want to be famous, or because I want to make a lot of money? And the answer to that was, I want a better world, really. And if I make a bit of money on the way, or if a few people like me, that's fine.
I want to come back to that link with spirit. Now, you are very experienced as a hypnotherapist, and you've talked about the transpersonal experiences you've had working as a hypnotherapist. What in your mind is the link between that creative part of the brain and the opening up to an external force that we might call spirit?
I'm not quite sure how it happened. It just did. It's almost like it happens at the right time, that you can, and it happens when you're not trying. Yeah, I didn't go to Rome to become creative. It just happened. I'd already been writing poetry, but I hadn't been writing poetry from art, only from nature or from feelings. It just came into being. I think it can start after a trauma or a particular life event. I know I started writing poetry after my first marriage split up, and I went through quite a dark period. And it's then that the poems started to flow, but the poems were not dark. It's almost like the poems were there to lift me out of it. I think there's a trigger for everybody. You can actually go out and do the exercise, and that may make a start on it. But if you're really going to become creative, it suddenly kicks in when a trigger happens. And for me, that trigger, I was only 30 years old, and that trigger was the ending of my first marriage. And I've been on this path for 40 years, although I've carried on working, and I didn't do anything with the poems until, fairly recently.
So I would say that if we're looking for a logical explanation as to why we would seek creative expression in a time of crisis, it's because we are so full of emotion and we have to let it out.
Yes.
It's like got to spill out in some form.
Yes.
It'll be poetry for some people, it'll be music and dance for others. It'll be art of some kind for other people, or even, knitting, whatever. But it has to spill out in some way. And I think that is understandable.
Yes.
What I'm looking for is that little bit extra. And the only thing that I think is that the brain waves that happen, that we experience when we are meditating, are very similar to the brain waves that we experience when we're in hypnosis. And that it's very similar to what people are experiencing when they are having mystical or psychic experiences. So there's something about getting into that space. And I think that when we are being creative, we are perhaps, because we're more in that
yes,
in that space,
yes,
not
I agree.
very left brain, but more in the right brain, that we are in a state that is more open. Yes. And therefore more open to inspiration. If we're out in nature And people always think meditation is something that we do when we are still and quiet with your eyes closed. And that is the case. But you speak to Qigong practitioners and they are not sitting
No.
there quietly. They're moving in order to meditate. And we know that we can be lost in nature because the brain has space to actually make connections. It's slowed down. It's not having to make a million decisions a second, it seems, as they are when we're walking through, busy streets, avoiding people that are walking towards us, or having to make sure we're not going to be hit by cars, or when we're driving. These are not meditative states because we're having to very quickly make decisions all the time. But when we're out in nature, all of that's gone. And all there is us and the trees. And that, if we ground ourselves rather than allowing ourselves to be thinking about a million things that have happened in the day or whatever, it's in that space that we begin to make connections and the brain has slowed down. So from your experience then professionally as a hypnotherapist, does that sound plausible to you?
Yeah, it did. I often used to feel doing an induction, relaxing into doing an induction with the client, just the sound of my own voice and the way I felt physically when I was doing that, how I would find information about that client, intuitive information, as that client was going into hypnosis, things that I might add or take out. Or yes, definitely. It is a meditative state.
And I think maybe that's the call to action for everyone watching, is that if you want to develop your creativity, then it helps to be in a meditative state. And if you want to develop the ability to meditate, your creativity is going to help that as well. So the two work together.
I think so. I think people who do practice meditation automatically become creative in some way. I mean, that may be in cooking, it may be in gardening, but they will become creative in some way. And actually, working with a trauma, it felt like that split up felt like a death, and that I had to move forward. And suddenly, I was given a path by going out, and I was going out walking to try to stabilize myself, and walking through parks in Leeds. and as I was doing that, the poetry started to flow, and then I got involved with a few spiritual people, and then the poetry started to flow a little more. Yes, it's like not a near-death experience, but sometimes when your path has to change, creativity can come in. And actually, working with nature and the arts during those times is a really great thing to do. It's really helpful. And sitting in meditation, not too much meditation if you've got trauma. If you're really disturbed, it's better to be in nature than just meditating. Because that becomes a little bit too insular, I think. It's better to have your feet on the ground and be in green space. That's my experience of it. Some people might disagree with that, and they're very welcome to do that and find their own way around that. But I would need, for me, if I was disturbed, to pull my mind down into the heart space. And best place for me to do that is in nature, although I can do it more now than I used to do when I was younger, to actually say, look, I'm all in my head. I need to seek refuge in the heart. Let's pull the consciousness down and see where it feels in the middle of the body being stabilized. And then I can connect to my feet much easier.
Well, the thing about being out in nature is, apart from everything else, it encourages us to breathe more deeply.
Yes.
It's easier to breathe more deeply when we're outdoors in green spaces.
Yes.
and the very stillness that's around us rubs off on us and helps us be more still. And you're right, you know, if people have suffered big trauma, little trauma, it doesn't matter. Very often it's that voice in the head that's constantly worrying, and we need to find a way of stilling it. That's, you know, clearly a very important thing to do. So we're looking at this then as a means of healing, but we're also looking at it as a means of developing our spirituality as much as our creativity. So can you give us an example of an exercise that somebody might do to start off with?
Yeah, to find a place. It can be just a local place, a green local place. And if people live in cities, you know, to find a place in a park that's not too busy. When I used to go in queue, I used to go into the wilder parts and find a seat there. To just kind of sit down and commune with the place, to make sure it's safe, and then just kind of connect. Start to look, to use the senses, to use your eyes to see what's around you. Look at everything in detail. Start to listen to the sounds. Start to get the sense. Just start to use the senses. And then eventually you start to become connected to that place. And once connection happens to that place, the place starts to give information. Sometimes it gives it in words. Sometimes it gives it in answers to questions. Sometimes it gives it in colors and symbols. It may give an idea for a painting, a poem, a story, piece of craft work, whatever people, you know, feel drawn to. It may give people an urge to dance. It may give people an urge to sing or listen to music, or even just go to the theatre and see something live. The important thing is it's starting to have an effect. And I used to walk labyrinths in a garden in Ham, behind near Richmond on Thames, behind a convent. I used to go and ask the sisters if I could walk their labyrinth, and they would always let me. And I used to go every fortnight. And just walking round and round in circles in this labyrinth, I found that worked perfectly for me. That was another place I used to go. And then there was Richmond Park, and then there was Syon Park. There were all, you know, all these places I used to walk along the Thames bank from Richmond down. It was amazing.
What we're also talking about is engaging the senses in order to be in the moment, which means being in our bodies. And so when we're talking about connecting with nature, it requires presence. It requires us to be there in that moment and to pay attention and notice everything around us. And, you know, it's a good analogy would be, how connected are you with a person if you're not paying attention to them when you're having a conversation?
Exactly.
Your mind on other things, you're going to miss what they are telling you. You're going to then feel like you haven't properly connected, or they're certainly going to feel that they haven't properly connected, because they will feel that your mind is elsewhere. And so if you are out in nature and you can begin just by paying attention to the sounds around you, then that's a good start. Then noticing details about what's around you visually, and then maybe perhaps picking up scents. I think that's a good thing to do. And if you are struggling, get your camera out, get your phone out, start taking pictures. Because when you start taking pictures, what are you doing? You are looking for something to photograph, which means you're paying attention.
Exactly.
So what you find to photograph, that's one that I've often recommended for my clients, and they really enjoy it, because it helps them to come out of their heads and pay attention to what's going on around them. And that's a really good way to start if you initially find that you're struggling.
I would agree with that. I'm out snapping pictures of full moons on water. I've got so many pictures of the sun rising. I'm out on the solstice in the early morning, taking the sun from the dawn until it rises into the morning. And so many pictures of close-ups of flowers, and special trees and stone circles and whatever I can find. And yes, it is a good thing to do because it enables you to notice it more
You're paying more attention.
and also to feel the atmosphere of places, because that is what used to help me so much to relate to people, is the feeling, the sense of touch, which is like intuitive feeling about what's really going on, because a person's face doesn't always tell you that, but you can feel it, and
You can,
developing the senses enables a healer to do that.
you can, and it takes me back to my first cat, and in fact, subsequent cats, um, where I always knew they were ill because they just felt different when I stroked them.
Hmm.
I just knew they were having an off day. They weren't quite
Yeah,
right, and
yeah.
I can't tell you exactly why I knew that. They seemed to
Mhm.
be perfectly normal in all other respects, but when I touched them, they just, I guess, they felt limp.
Mm.
Their fur felt limp, if I can
Mhm.
put it like that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I
Yeah.
mean, animals have these senses anyway. We've just lost the ability. We've become so civilized, or we think we're so civilized, that we've actually lost that ability to relate on a deep level.
Mm,
We relate according to our beliefs, not according to the truth sometimes.
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, you've certainly given us lots of inspiration, and I hope that everyone is going to start thinking about what they could do to
Yes.
get on
That's
their
what I want. That's what I want to do, is I want to inspire people to find that creative heart, to actually start to say, well, look, we can all get together and we can put out things that can help to make changes. We can't stop people from taking over countries and doing what they do in the normal way. We don't have that kind of power, but we do have the power to get together as a community of light and to actually put light out by actually telling the truth through what we create. And that's the best thing we can do to bring in new things, and that's all we can do.
beautiful. Well, I think that's, I couldn't put it better myself. And so, everyone out there who would like to begin their creative journey or perhaps enhance their creative journey,
Hmm.
because they've already begun, the book that we are discussing is called To Sing with Bards and Angels, Journey into the Creative Heart. Iona, thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, it can be bought on Amazon and Waterstones and anywhere where good books are sold. That's all I can say.
And if people want to find out more about your work, do you have a website?
I have. It's www.ionajenkins.com.
I will be putting a link to that in the description box, along with the link to your book. Thank you once
Great.
again.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be looking at healing ancestral roots. Until then, goodbye.